You press the gas and the car moves. You press the brake and it stops. Seems simple, but inside a lot is happening. Fuel burns, air mixes, parts move fast. It's more than just parts working together. In the next 15 minutes, we'll explain how all of this works. At the heart of it, your car's engine has one main job: turn gasoline into motion so your car can go from your driveway to the grocery store. And the way it does that? It burns the fuel inside itself. That's why it's called an internal combustion engine. Combustion is just a fancy word for a controlled fire. Yes, there's a tiny fire party happening under your hood every time you drive. So your engine is like a big, strong set of lungs that inhales air and fuel, squeezes them together in a cylinder, lights a spark, and then exhales the smoke. That boom pushes a piston down, which turns a crankshaft, which spins your wheels. Simple when you say it like that, it's just organized explosions that push you forward. There are several types of internal combustion engines out there. For example, diesel engines and gas turbine engines are two common ones. Each type comes with its own set of pros and cons. Some are better for power, others for efficiency. It all depends on what you need the engine to do. Here's a fun thought. Take a tiny bit of gasoline, squeeze it into a small space, and light it on fire. Boom! You've just made a mini explosion. Now imagine doing that hundreds of times every minute, but in a controlled, well-behaved way, of course, and using all that fiery energy to move your car. That, in a nutshell, is the magic behind your car's engine. This idea is the heart of what's called a reciprocating internal combustion engine. Sounds fancy, but it really just means the engine works by repeating this fuel-burning process over and over again, turning small explosions into motion. Now, how do cars actually do that without turning into flaming go-karts? Most gasoline engines use something called the four-stroke combustion cycle. It's kind of like a four-step dance that repeats non-stop while your engine runs. This system is also known as the Otto cycle, named after Nicholas Otto, the clever fellow who figured this all out back in 1867. So, what are the four steps? The engine works through a four-step cycle that repeats non-stop. First is intake, like the engine taking a deep breath, pulling in air and fuel. Then comes compression, where that mix gets squeezed tightly inside the cylinder. Next is power, where a spark ignites the mix, causing a small explosion that drives the piston down with force. Finally, there's exhaust, where the burnt gases are pushed out to clear the way for the next breath. This cycle repeats hundreds of times every minute, powering everything from cars to lawnmowers. If learning how things work gets your gears turning, tap like and subscribe, fuel your curiosity, and keep your mental engine running strong. It's like your engine's doing deep breathing exercises and fireworks at the same time, only faster and with a lot more oil. Pretty amazing, right? That old car of yours is smarter than it looks. Now let's go inside the engine and see how it works. The piston is connected to the crankshaft by a connecting rod, kind of like the arm that resets a spring-loaded toy. As the crankshaft spins, it gets everything ready for the next big bang. Let's go through what happens during one full engine cycle. It's like a four-step routine with some power in the middle. First, the piston starts at the top, the intake valve opens, and the piston moves downward, sucking in a fresh mix of air and just a tiny splash of gasoline. This is the intake stroke. Believe it or not, even a tiny drop of fuel in the air is enough to do the job. Next comes the compression stroke. The piston pushes back up, squeezing that air-fuel mix into a tight little pocket. The tighter the mix, the bigger the more power. At the top of that stroke, the spark plug fires, lighting the fuel like a mini firecracker. This is the power stroke, and it sends the piston shooting down again with a lot of force. That's the real action moment, the part that gives your car the energy to move. Then comes the exhaust stroke. The piston heads back up once more, but this time the exhaust valve opens, letting all those burned gases escape out the tailpipe. Once the smoke clears, the whole thing starts over again. And car modifiers love this part, because it's what makes their car sound loud and powerful. While the pistons are moving up and down, the crankshaft is busy turning that motion into a spinning motion, which is perfect since your wheels also spin to move the car. Now that we've got the basic dance moves down, let's look at all the parts that come together to make this engine party happen, starting with the cylinders. At the heart of your engine is something called a cylinder. Think of it as a metal tube where all the action happens. Inside that tube, a piston moves up and down like a little metal fist, punching away with perfect timing. In simple machines like lawnmowers, you usually find just one cylinder doing all the work. But in cars, oh, they like to share the load. Most have 4, 6, or even 8 cylinders working together to keep things smooth and powerful. Now here's where it gets interesting and a little artistic. When you hear someone say inline 4, they're not talking about a dance move. It means the engine has 4 cylinders lined up in a row. Simple, tidy, and quite popular in everyday cars. But wait, there's more. Cylinders in multi-cylinder engines can be arranged in different ways. Inline, like soldiers standing in a row, and V-shaped, like they're sitting at an open book. Or flat, also called boxer engines, where cylinders lie flat on either side like they're having a nap. Each of these designs has its own merits and demerits. For example, some run smoother, some are cheaper to build, and some are compact enough to fit in small spaces, great for sports cars or vehicles with tight engine bays. It's kind of like choosing between a recliner, a rocking chair, and a beanbag. They all do the job, but some fit your style better. So next time someone tells you about their V6 or boxer engine, you'll know exactly what they mean, and you might just impress them right back. Next comes the spark plug. It's basically the matchstick of the engine. At just the right moment, it sends out a tiny spark that lights up the air and fuel mixture inside the cylinder. That little spark is everything. If the timing is off, the whole process can fall apart. Your engine might cough, sputter, or refuse to start, kind of like us when we hear the alarm but haven't had coffee yet. Now let's talk about the valves. There are usually 2 per cylinder, one for intake and one for exhaust. Picture a club with 2 doors and 2 bouncers. The intake valve is the one that opens up to let the air and fuel mix in. The exhaust valve is the one that opens to let the burnt gases out once the job is done. During the really important moments, like compression and combustion, both valves stay completely shut. That's because the chamber needs to be sealed tight. No leaks allowed. The explosion has to push down on the piston with full force to create movement. Timing is everything here. The valves have to open and close at the right moments, just like the spark plug has to fire at the right time. It's all part of the engine's rhythm. Next comes the piston, a solid piece of metal that moves up and down inside the cylinder like a tiny elevator. When the fuel and air mixture explodes, it pushes the piston down. That motion gets transferred through other parts to eventually turn your wheels. So while it looks simple, the piston is doing serious work. Wrapped around that piston are piston rings. Small, yes, but very important. They have 2 main jobs. First, they seal the gap between the piston and the cylinder wall so the fuel and air mixture stays where it should. If that mix escapes, your engine loses power. Second, they keep engine oil from slipping into the combustion chamber and getting burned up. If oil does sneak in and burn, you'll notice your car needing oil more often than it should. If your engine feels like it's using oil faster than usual, those rings could be worn out. That's more common in older engines, especially ones with a lot of miles. The good news is that modern piston rings are built to last longer thanks to stronger materials and better design. So if you've got a newer car, you're less likely to be topping up oil all the time or dealing with early engine wear. Let's talk about a few more engine parts that keep everything moving smoothly under the hood, kind of like the hidden gears in an old-fashioned clock. We've got the connecting rod. Think of it as the middleman between the piston and the crankshaft. It links the two together and needs to be pretty flexible. It rotates at both ends so it can handle all the twisting and turning as the piston goes up and down and the crankshaft spins around. Speaking of the crankshaft, this is the part that really brings the magic. It takes the piston's straight up and down motion and turns it into a smooth spinning motion, just like the crank on a jack-in-the-box or an old water well. That spinning motion is what eventually turns your car's wheels and gets you down the road. And then there's the sump. It's like a little oil bath at the bottom of the engine. It surrounds the crankshaft and holds the engine oil in a container called the oil pan. That oil doesn't just sit there looking pretty. It's pumped around to keep all the metal parts slick and cool, so nothing grinds, overheats, or complains. Since we now have a clear view of what happens inside an engine, now we will cover several systems that work together to turn fuel into motion. In the next few sections, we'll dive into the different subsystems that make all of this happen. First comes the engine valve train and ignition systems. The valve train is in charge of opening and closing the valves at just the right time, letting air and fuel in and sending exhaust out. This job is handled by a part called the camshaft. It has special lobes that push the valves up and down like lifting and dropping a gate. In most modern cars, engines use what's called an overhead cam setup, which means the camshaft sits right above the valves. This makes everything run more smoothly and efficiently. In the old days, engines had the camshaft buried lower down in the engine, near the crankshaft. It worked, but it wasn't exactly the most elegant system. To keep things timed perfectly, a timing belt or chain links the crankshaft to the camshaft. The camshaft spins at half the speed of the crankshaft, keeping the rhythm just right. High-performance engines even go a step further with 4 valves per cylinder, 2 for intake and 2 for exhaust. That needs 2 camshafts per side, which is why you'll hear the term dual overhead cams. Then there's the ignition system, which sends a high-voltage jolt to the spark plugs. It starts at the distributor, that little gadget under the hood, with 1 wire in the center and several wires branching out. It makes sure each cylinder gets its spark exactly when needed, helping the engine run nice and smooth. Next up, we'll explore how your car's engine actually gets started, keeps it cool, and breathes. Most cars use a cooling system that includes a radiator and a water pump. The pump pushes coolant around the engine, soaking up the heat from the cylinders. That hot water then travels to the radiator, where it cools off before going back to do the job again. Think of it like a little water-based air conditioner for your engine. Now, not all engines use water to cool down. Some, like older Volkswagen Beetles before 1999, many motorcycles, and even lawn mowers use air cooling. These engines have metal fins on them that help spread the heat into the air. It's a lighter system, but the engine usually runs hotter, which can wear it out faster. Then there's air circulation, which is all about getting enough oxygen into the engine for combustion. In most cars, air just flows through a filter and into the engine naturally. That's called normal aspiration. But in performance cars, or even modern fuel-efficient ones, you'll hear about turbochargers and superchargers. These devices pressurize the air going in, so more air and fuel fits in each cylinder. That means more power. A turbocharger uses the engine's own exhaust to spin a turbine and compress the incoming air smart and efficiently. A supercharger does the same thing, but is powered by the engine directly. Earlier, we talked about what happens when the engine is running. But here comes the real question. How does the engine actually start in the first place? It all begins with the starter motor and a starter solenoid. When you turn the key, the solenoid sends a big wave of electricity to the motor. That motor has to fight friction, compression, and everything else that's connected to the engine to get it spinning, just enough for the combustion to begin. And voila, your engine roars to life. So do you know how car companies squeeze more power and better fuel efficiency out of an engine? They use a lot of clever tricks. First off, bigger engines make more power. That's called increasing displacement. You can do that by making the cylinders larger or adding more of them. Some high-end cars even have 12 cylinders. That's a lot of muscle. Another method is increasing the compression ratio. This means squeezing the air-fuel mix tighter before it explodes. Tighter compression gives you more power, but it also risks early ignition. That's why high-performance engines often need high-octane fuel. It resists premature combustion. Then there's the idea of cramming more air into each cylinder. More air means you can add more fuel, which means more power. That's where turbochargers and superchargers come in. They pressurize the air going into the engine, like forcing more oxygen into a fire. But compressing air also makes it hot, which isn't ideal. Hot air doesn't expand as well during combustion. So many cars use intercoolers to cool the air down before it hits the engine. Airflow is another big factor. You want air to flow in and out of the engine as easily as possible. 2 intake and 2 exhaust valves per cylinder make that happen. That's why you hear terms like 16-valve engine. Bigger filters, smoother intake manifolds, and dual exhaust systems all help air move freely. Making lighter parts also boosts performance. Lighter pistons move more easily, saving energy and fuel. And finally, fuel injection is key. It lets the engine give each cylinder exactly the right amount of fuel at the right time, which means better power and efficiency. All of these little changes add up to a smoother, stronger, and smarter engine. So, now that you know how the engine works, What's your take on how engine types impact performance? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, like and share if you found this helpful, and don't miss our previous video on FWD, RWD, AWD, and 4x4 choices. Subscribe for more.